Welcome to the Fundamentals of Sponsored Projects at CSU. This is our series. This hour we will feature proposal review and submission. I am Shannon Irie. I'm your moderator for this session. I am one of the training and information coordinators here at the Office of Sponsored Programs. We also made interactive worksheets for each session that you can access on our website. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. We have Lauren and Tracy. So Lauren and Tracy, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Lucio, the pre-award manager for the College of Natural Sciences. I started out in the Office of Sponsored Programs as an administrative assistant and worked through various roles until I landed my job now. And today is actually my 7th year anniversary here at CSU and in research administration.
Congratulations, Lauren.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Trujillo. I'm a research administrator in Warner College of Natural Resources. I've been at CSU for 34 years and been doing research admin for about 31 of those years. I've been in sponsored programs multiple times in an accounting position, the pre-award library, and my most recent time in sponsored programs was as a research administrator before I moved to Warner College. I am a unique position in that I have full submission authority for all of the PIs that I support in my unit. So thank you for coming today, and we're excited to present this workshop. So let's jump into the sponsored project lifecycle. So again, we're looking at review and submission of proposals. And you'll see this graphic in a lot of our training that we're presenting to kind of show the full life cycle of an award sponsored project. And you see the snake emblem coming full circle. And so at the proposal stage, it's assumed that you have a budget and the rest of the proposal documents near ready for submission. So proposals for extramural funding. OSP is the coordinating office for externally funded activities, proposals for external funding via grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, some gifts on rare occasion. And that's typically gifts that the eligibility from the sponsor requires us to go through 501c3, which CSU is not, but our foundation is. So there's often times where it will come into the foundation and then it is administered through sponsored programs because it is a true sponsored project. And those are gifts usually that, again, have some strings attached to them. So it's not maybe a pure gift in nature. So what does extramural mean? Extramural funding is CSU definitions for our purposes is that we're talking about awards of projects with funding that's coming from outside the university. So it's not an internal opportunity. It's funding coming from outside of CSU. And all proposals for external funding or extramural funding must be reviewed and submitted by the Office of Sponsored Programs or a delegate such as myself. Proposals requiring and review include full proposals, preliminary proposals, sometimes letter of intent. It depends, as you'll hear a lot in research administration. When you have a letter of intent or a pre-proposal that has a budget component to it, then it does require review and submission by sponsored programs. When we have letter of intent or other pre-proposals that don't require budget, then the PIs are usually authorized to submit those directly to the sponsor. Moving on, this session will provide an overview of the systems and processes for proposal review and submission, as well as post-award follow-up, including guidance on best practices and timing of review. This slide is illustrating the types of sponsoring organizations that we deal with. We have associations, professional organizations, societies, business and industry, federal awarding agencies, state and local governments, and foundations. And there's a hint on here. This is going to be some information that you can jot down on your worksheet. I'm going to try and give you hints as we go through this so you can kind of jot down notes, use that as a resource down the road.
Tracy, Jenny put into the chat that some sponsors require AOR submission of LOIs, and that is true.
That is very true. So I should always caveat that with saying it depends. For the most part, LOIs, if it does not require an AOR submission, the PIs would be authorized. And again, you've got to read your solicitation and your guidelines very carefully to look at the eligibility and who is required to submit and what components are required, because they vary across the gamut. For LOIs, they're often called white papers, pre-proposals. There's a lot of different terminology associated with that. So thank you, Jenny, for that note. That's a very good point to make. And I'd like you to list examples in the chat of some organizations that might fall within this list that we've got on the slide. So just take a couple minutes and we'll see if you have any that you're not sure fit in these boxes. Just go ahead and share some information. And we've got NIH, DOE, those are USDA. I can't read this. I can talk fast, but these are coming in good. Great job, everybody. We deal a lot with federal sponsors, but we also deal with non-federal, as the slide indicates. Gates Foundation, grants and gifts from the Gates Foundation. So that's another interesting one. Alzheimer's, City of Fort Collins. I just submitted a sub-award proposal to the City of Fort Collins. National Forest Foundation, another good one. And we do, in my college, we do a lot with the Department of Agriculture and Department of Interior. And so you've got those umbrella federal agencies over smaller agencies within. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Lauren for our next slide.
All right, limitations and eligibility. There's a couple different levels of limitations and eligibility to consider. First, it's institutional and then sponsor. So here at CSU, we have eligibility requirements for who can serve as a PI or a co-PI on a sponsored project. The first requirement is that you have to be a CSU employee. The second is obviously you need the necessary skills and knowledge to fulfill the requirements that you're proposing. And then the third is a non-temporary appointment. Sometimes exceptions can be made. If a postdoc or a research associate could fulfill the role of PI appropriately, then we would just want to obtain approval from chair or unit head and then a college dean or equivalent. We usually just get those approvals as a concurrence through email and then attach that email as an internal attachment in KRPD so that OSP knows that we've gone through all of those proper channels to make sure our PI is eligible. And then for sponsor limitations, we have things like institutional limitations. Only specific institutions can apply, higher institutions of education, 501c3s. There can also be PI limitations. So the investigator needs to be at a specific level of their career, or they can only submit to so many competitions. And then we also have limited submission opportunities, which are funding opportunities that allow a limited number of submissions from an institution. So we could have 3 PIs interested in submitting to a limited submission opportunity that only allows 2 applications per institution. That's an issue, right? What do we do in that case? The Research Acceleration Office here at CSU manages all of the limited submission opportunities. Every week, they're posting limited submission opportunities to the InfoReady system, and then they send those posts out through their listserv so that investigators are aware of those opportunities and know about those additional layers of institutional approvals before we can submit. PIs submit through InfoReady. The Research Acceleration Office puts together a review committee to review those applications, and then they select whoever is going to submit on behalf of the university. And they usually are informed via email, and we try to attach that email in the internal attachments section of KRPD also. And then it's also just best practice if you have an investigator that's been selected to submit to a limited submission opportunity, but they decide later on that they're not going to submit after all, we want to let the Research Acceleration Office know about that because that third investigator might still want to apply. That opens that opportunity up for them.
I was just going to say, I also put the link into our guidance tab on our OSP website because we do have a PI eligibility guidance document that is in there. So I did put the link in there for that as well.
Thank you, Shannon. We're going to do an activity here. I'm going to drop the link to the NSF MRI or the Major Research Instrumentation Program here in the link. I want you guys to go to this solicitation. We're going to look for some of the limits that they have on this program. And as you find them, plop them into the chat. most of the limitations should show up within the first 5 pages. I know that's a lot. And if you're not familiar with navigating solicitations, it does kind of put you in panic mode when you have 5 minutes to find the info. So don't panic, just play. Let's see what you find.
Can you hear the music? I shared my.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, they're already starting to come in. Great, we're already getting some people with finding some information in there. The other thing about solicitations like this, and for those of you who are in here who have looked at a lot of them, there's a lot of redundancies. So they say things over and over and over again. So sometimes you'll get a 28-page solicitation and they say the same things about 3 or 4 times.
Can anybody find a limitation regarding for-profit entities? Or maybe a limitation regarding subawardees. Thank you, Audrey. That's right, Julie. Good job, guys.
How are we doing? How many have we found? Most of them? Good portion?
Yeah, I would say we found a good portion of them.
Okay. So how about, looks like we're not getting any more responses here, so let's there we go. Oh.
One thing I did want to point out was that at the top of page 5 of that solicitation, you'll note that it is guiding investigators who are interested to contact their sponsored project office because of all of these limitations. So again, just work with your sponsored programs team, and then if there is the limited submission component, then they'll help you work with the Research Acceleration Office to go through those proper channels.
Great, and again, you guys, I think, found everything that Lauren had on her list.
So
yeah.
We've got, it's limited to institutions of higher education and not-for-profit. For-profits are only eligible as subawardees. We're limited 2 proposals per organization in track 1, 1 proposal per organization in track 2, and 1 proposal per organization in track 3. Separately submitted linked collaborative proposals count towards the institutional limit. So with NSF, we can go together as partners collaboratively rather than as a subaward, and that does count toward both institutions' limits. And then if we're going in as a subawardee, less than $20,000 does not count toward that limit, but more than 20,000 does. So there's a lot of things to consider when we're applying for a program like this, and especially if we're bringing partners along. There are some other major programs with limitations. Some examples are the NSF Early Career Program, which has a PI eligibility limit. They have to be untenured in an assistant professor or equivalent position and cannot submit to more than 3 competitions. The USDA NIFA equipment program is an institutional limit of 2 proposals per eligible organization. And then we have the NIH area, which is Academic Research Enhancement Award. It has an institutional and a PI eligibility limit. Institutional limit is limited to accredited public or nonprofit private schools who have received less than a certain dollar threshold per year total costs in the last 4 of 7 fiscal years. We don't ever qualify for that, so I don't think we've applied. And then the PI limit is that they cannot be a PI on an active NIH grant at the time of award. Those are just some examples of reoccurring limited submission opportunities, but there could be limits associated with any program, non-reoccurring or non-federal. So be sure to pay attention to the guidance, and if the opportunity isn't already available in InfoReady, make sure you're working with OSP and the Research Acceleration Office. Okay. Our PI decides to seek external funding. This is sort of the typical flow of that process. First, the PI has an idea, then the PI finds an opportunity that aligns with that idea, and then they need to notify us that they're interested in submitting. There are various ways across campus that PIs notify us of their plan to submit. In the College of Natural Sciences and in the College of Engineering, I know there's like an online notification form that PIs can fill out, and when they submit it, the information goes directly to their respective support teams. In Tracy's college, Warner College, PIs initiate the KRPD record themselves a lot of times, and then they just kind of collaborate that way. In any case, we're collaborating with the PI to get their budget information into the KRPD system. KRPD is the Quality Research Proposal Development System. It's CSU's system of record for proposal and budget information. It allows investigators and administrators to keep on track with deadlines, collaborate on proposal development, review different components as they're ready, and then route for institutional approvals. And ultimately, the deadline date within that KRPD record is what gets the proposal on OSP's radar. So we want to make sure that we are entering that date when we create the record. KRPD budget provides the most accurate budget estimate. We apply salary inflation at the start of every CSU fiscal year. So that's regardless of your project start date. So for example, if we have a project that's going to start in October, KRPD is going to account for the increase that could potentially happen this July. And sometimes when PIs are drafting their own budgets, they aren't accounting for those initial increases. And that's usually where that discrepancy comes from when they provide us a draft budget versus what we're getting from KRPD. So one of the biggest frustrations is trying to back into numbers from a drafted budget that a PI provides you. And so one of my biggest suggestions to our PIs is always start with us, start with KRPD. That way we've got accurate rates, accurate numbers, accurate information. And then once you have budget and all of the business related elements in KRPD, then we will ping our OSP research administrator for the initial review. The way that looks can vary across campus too. It just depends on what PI support looks like. But once you ping your OSP administrator, they'll review those components and give feedback, and then the opportunity to route for approvals before we submit to the sponsor. OSP does provide support above and beyond review and submission. They can help interpret guidelines, provide insight from past experience, and point us to other technical resources that might be available on campus. So be sure to work with your OSP team throughout the whole life cycle of the process.
And the real quick technical note on KRPD, the submit button used to say submit to routing. It now says submit to review. So that's something to be aware of with your PIs, that we're reaching out to sponsored programs, your sponsored programs representative. Do not click that button until they have reviewed it. They will then direct you, because it gets into the approval routing. And if they have not yet had a chance to review it, and they have to make any changes or recommend changes, it kicks it all the way back to routing.
Important details. Okay. Full components of a proposal application. We've got the administrative component, scientific component, programmatic component, and the financial. Those together create the full package. And this is another one of our activities. So if you can use the annotate option, let's go ahead and show where the research administrators are the most helpful and have the greatest impact within these 4 components of the proposal. You can just like circle or point or whatever works best.
We're seeing some people put in administrative, the financial.
The administrative includes things like providing accurate institutional information for the cover and face pages and coordinating AOR signature. Scientific is the abstract, aims, project narrative. Programmatic covers project personnel and resources details. And then the financial is obviously budget justification, cost share. Only when required, right, guys?
Absolutely, and only the amount or as minimal as required when possible.
Great.
All right, we've got some good answers here in the chat and on screen. I would agree with Whitney. Programmatic, administrative, and financial are all components that we can be helpful in. Scientific, not really. I'm not a scientist. So we will go ahead and talk about the administrative components. General institutional information is available on OSP's commonly requested information page. A lot of this information auto-populates in sponsor portals based on our institutional registration, but we are going to do an activity. So we are dropping the commonly requested information link in the chat. And if you guys can go to that page, we are asking you to find the CSU's congressional district, human subjects assurance number, tax ID, and our unique entity identifier. If you can find those 4 things, let's drop them in the chat. Let us know, like, if it was easy for you to find, if you struggled to locate it. And this is a web page that I have familiarized myself with entirely because I'm always referring to it and just making sure that I'm pulling the right information and that we've plugged in the right information. So if you don't access this page often, I suggest that you start doing so. All right, good job, guys. You'll notice with the tax ID that there are 2 different numbers. The first one is for like pretty much all applications. The second one is for any PHS sponsor. So HHS, NIH, CDC, that's one of the added review checks that OSP is watching for when they review our applications too, to make sure that we are referencing the right tax ID number.
And I see that we have a comment that it's very easy to find.
Good.
So.
All right, the scientific section, this component contains the abstract or the project summary, which is a concise breakdown of the project's aims and methods and its anticipated significance. And this document usually has a page, word, or character limit. The specific aims is an NIH terminology. It defines the need and solutions and concisely identifies the central problem or knowledge gap, proposes a novel and impactful solution, and outlines the anticipated benefits of the proposed work. Then there's the research strategy or the scope of work. This section lays out the why and how of the research and identifies the driving force behind the project, outlining the research journey for each objective, highlights the expected milestones, potential pitfalls, and communication strategies. So this is like the big piece that we're always waiting for our PIs to finalize on the last day, right? It's also often referred to as the project description or project narrative. And then there's compliance plans, which detail the risk mitigation plans if there are any humans, animals, or select agents involved in the research. And then we've got the programmatic component, which refers to essential project documents like the biosketches, current and pending support documents, data management plans, collaboration letters with collaborators. This is where we can provide a little bit of support, helping them know what current and pending awards they have out there, making sure that they're providing accurate information in that document, gathering the documents from their collaborators from other institutions or across campus. We can connect them to available resources on campus. But other than that, they're kind of pulling these things together themselves. We can guide them with a little bit of help. And then the financial component, this is the big collaboration between the PIs and us unit administrators, right? We're ensuring that the project needs, the budget accuracy, and compliance are all being met on this component here. So we develop the budget in KRPD for accuracy, and we draft a budget narrative or a budget justification for the PI's input. That's the document that explains costs in each budget category, including cost share when required, right? Justifies our personnel in terms of their name, role, their person months devoted to the project. And then also this is where we detail exclusions from our F&A rate based calculation. So at CSU, we have a modified total direct cost base, which excludes tuition, equipment, subaward costs over $25,000. We detail that in the budget justification. We also provide support in gathering backup documentation when required by the sponsor. So if they're asking for our negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, or if they want a travel policy, we can provide the FPI for that. If they're asking for salary documentation, we can provide the personnel file data. If they want quotes for equipment, we usually are asking the PIs to provide that for us, but because we know where to locate all of the other backup documentation, that's where we come in and help those PIs. And then we also coordinate the internal business aspects of the submission in regards to gathering subaward documentation, institutional commitments when cost share is required, indirect cost splits when we're collaborating across units, and also coordinating review with sponsored programs.
Any questions at this point? Jump in and answer any of those before we move on to the next slide. Love the colors. Yeah.
Yep. So it's very Mardi Gras, by the way.
Yeah.
For today.
Okay, so I think we're ready for the next slide. Roles and responsibilities. We're going to jump into that. And on the OSP website, there is a roles and responsibilities matrix.
Roles and responsibilities matrix actually shows up in a couple of different places on our website. So one of them is we have a PDF document that is on the guidance page. But also, if you go to the award lifecycle tiles, which are in guidance, or they're also on our main webpage, each of those tiles is a clickable tile, and you can go in there and there's a roles and responsibilities matrix on each of those tiles.
Great, thank you, Shannon. So this is how you know who does what and whose primary responsibility it is for different aspects of the proposal review, approval, and getting it submitted. So you'll see we've got a column for PI, unit, department, college, OSP, and then other resources. You'll note that some of these, there's combined. You may see effort from both. Like as Lauren mentioned, she helps write the justifications. And in my college, our PIs write the justifications, but we will make edits. We will make corrections for them and try and get the best justification out as we can for the proposal. So it's the best product we can put out. You may have opportunities that, or proposals, excuse me, that involve export control. And then you're going to have another unit, secure and global research, that may need to be looped in. If you have an export control issue, international proposals oftentimes may need some input from SGR. So, keep that in mind. And they're happy for PIs to reach out if they need any assistance at the proposal stage. That is one of the questions in the questionnaire in KRPD. So that's one of the things that the research administrator is looking at when we're looking through the questionnaire and the KRPD record. Primarily, as Lauren's kind of shown on some of the other sides, the science piece is pretty much the PI. That's their wheelhouse. We're not scientists, most of us. And so we rely on them to do that. That's one of the really nice things about KRPD is that if we can get the budget and the justification nailed down and get placeholders in there, they can continue to work on the science up until that last day. We encourage them to get it done sooner than later, but as things go, sometimes it is that last day where you're getting that final document. I encourage you to look through those guidance documents. So KRPD, or Quality Research Proposal Development System, is the system of record at CSU. And Kuali, just a little fun fact for you, is the Malaysian word for walk. And so when Kuali was developed, it's an open source software. It was a foundation. So partners were institutions of higher education. They would contribute programmers, time, money, and Kuali came about as the name because it's a Malaysian walk. So all these ingredients go into one pot. So that's kind of the idea behind Kuali and the naming of that. And so we have the proposal routing and approval system. We also have the award system on the sponsored program side for managing the awards. We have our regulatory compliance systems that are also part of it. And so there's different modules that you can buy as part of the Quali package. And the foundation then moved to Quali Company because it was easier for a company to get things to market faster. So they have taken several homegrown systems to create one system that has the same look and feel. Quali Financial System, the root system, originally was developed at Indiana University. The Quali Research Proposal Development System, and particularly the budget system, was developed at MIT. It is a very complex budget system. It allows for application of multiple rates. And so that's why PIs may struggle with it. It doesn't operate like a spreadsheet. In my college, we get them to start the care record and then we give them budget assistance. Some of them have gotten used to it and can use it on their own, but it allows us to electronically route the proposal for approvals. As per our policies, we're supposed to have proposals fully routed and approved prior to submission, so that it alerts PIs, department heads, their co-PIs, they can approve it. They can see what their individual subordinates are doing for department heads, if there's cost share involved, etc. It involves key personnel certifications, compliance questionnaire, and the certification questions, let me back up on that a little bit, changes depending on your sponsor. If it's NIH or NSF, sometimes there's like 3 questions versus 2 questions. The compliance questionnaire is that questionnaire on the proposal side of the module where they have to answer all those questions. And some of those it addresses the international component. If there's any export control situations, it asks for the URL for the solicitation. And then you have the budgeting module. And the one really nice thing about Quali is that 2 people can be working in the record at the same time. You can have one person in the proposal half of the module and the second person in the budget half of the module. When you have one person in the proposal half, the person in the budget half can look at the proposal side, but they can't make any changes. So it does lock down not allowing multiple people to make changes at the same time. So if you're ever in a record and you get that notice at the top of the screen that says the record has been locked, it usually kind of gives some identifying information. That's an indicator that somebody may be in the record, or the PI or whoever was last in the record did not use the close button to close out of it, which is really important little note to make. If you just close your browser, it locks the record, creating the pessimistic lock. It will release itself within 24 hours, but it prevents any edits from occurring in the record at that time. Oftentimes when that happens, I reach out to my PI if it was them and say, can you just get back in the record really quick, click that close button, and we're good to go. Then I can make any needed changes for that proposal to get it moving forward. So why at the proposal stage are we doing Quali KRPD? Well, it is our system of record. They have embedded our institutional rates in it. So we get a indirect cost rate agreement for 5 years at a time. So the whole 5-year span is in there. Depending on the type of activity that you note in that basic information screen determines the rates that will show up in the budget and be applied to your budget. So if it's designated as research activity, you're going to see the 54% modified total direct costs in that rate section of the budget. It has that correct information. It also has our fringe rates. Now, one little note on the fringe rates is we only get 1 year of fringe approved at a time, so there's only ever 1 year of fringe in KRPD. And so by using the system of record and using the system that has our rates embedded, it saves time at the award. We're not going to have issues with the budget wasn't calculated correctly, or they didn't apply the correct indirect cost rate, or they have an old fringe rate.
Tracy, I did drop into the chat the place on the OSP website where we have a whole bunch of KRPD quick guides, demos, videos, all sorts of things in there. So go in there and look.
The budget is really complex in KRPD. So thank you, Shannon, for pointing that out, because there's a lot of training information on the OSP website about Koali and in general. So to put another plug out there, if you have not bookmarked those sites or explored it, please do. It's going to save you some time banging your head against the wall, trying to figure out, because, honestly, it's not the most intuitive system to use. It does not operate like a spreadsheet. And so you'll save yourself some headaches and frustrations down the road if you can utilize those training resources on the OSP website. So you're getting ready to submit. Draft budgets and business-related elements received by OSP for review 5 business days prior are reviewed on a first in, first out basis. So they're reviewed in the order they come in. So just because PI Smith submitted his proposal 2 days before the deadline and PI Jones submitted his 5 days ahead, but his is due after PI Smith, it's not going to be jumped to the front of the line, which is only fair. It should be handled on a first in, first out basis, which is what I continually remind our PIs of. Now, in our college, we have an actually longer deadline. We have a 10 business day rule for guaranteed timely submission and help inputting the budget and to provide the most guidance and review the best review that we can. That said, we do our best to submit any proposal that we get, but on occasion, if they come in too late in our college, they have been turned down. So it is important for them to get this stuff in early, and it's never too early. I mean, we have the 5 business days, but if you can get it done sooner, by all means, if you guys get it done sooner, get it to OSP sooner. They will love you for that, because it gets, you've got 5 business days, but when you're dealing with a very large volume of proposals from your college that you support, it can still get down to the wire, and it's a lot of volume for sure. So OSP will review the business elements, and that is listed on the slide. So it's basically your budget justification, and a draft scope of work. And those are kind of the first components that we usually want you to get nailed down so that we can get that quality record routing for approvals, and we can put placeholder files in quality so that you can continue routing. Once it's in routing, you cannot add any new attachments and you cannot make changes to the budget. If you have placeholders in there, you can replace those files all the way up until the point that OSP reviews. So it's a good idea in our review. We will add placeholder documents to kind of give PIs the cue, and also for me to know what I have to submit at the end. So if I have a placeholder in there, I know this is something in that proposal tab that has to go. And so we work on the budget justification first, so we can make that happen. We get institutional commitments, including indirect cost waivers. If your PI is pursuing an indirect cost waiver, which is never recommended, but it happens, and there are cases where it's necessary, you need to get that approved prior to submission. Because if we're doing a waiver and for some reason it is not approved, which has also happened, they are not automatically approved all the way up the chain. I have seen cases where it has been denied. Then your PI is going to need time to regroup and rebudget and figure out how they're going to move this project forward, and if they can move it forward. And those are F&A waivers are basically when it's a voluntary reduction of indirect cost or waiving. It's not a sponsor guideline in the solicitation. Jenny noted that just this week, F&A waiver on Team 4 was denied. So see, it does happen. They are approved, but it's not a given. So they've got to plan ahead for that. And then subaward documentation. Subaward documentation, we basically need a mini proposal from whatever entity you have in your proposal as a subaward. So that includes their draft scope of work, specific to what they're doing on that project, their detailed budget and their budget narrative, and then any sponsor required forms that would have to come from the subawardee. They may have their own budget template, for example. And then we also have our subrecipient commitment form that you can find on the OSP website under the forms, and always go to the website and get the most current form. Just want to caution you, when you download those forms, sometimes they're tweaking them RAs may be tweaking and making changes, and you may have an outdated form. So it's always best to go and get the newest, most up-to-date form from their website. And then significant financial interest disclosures training is up to date. So that's your COI and FCOI training at CSU. And within KRPD, when you're in that key personnel section, it will kind of highlight if their disclosure has been approved or if it's pending. So that's a nice little trigger for people that are working on this with the PIs. That should be done prior to submission. The COI is an annual process for everybody at CSU, but particularly faculty NAD-Pro. I don't know the state classified, but if you're working on a research project, this is critical that they have to get this completed. And NIH and NSF particularly have to have the FCOI. That's one of their policies, and that's one of the certification questions when you look at KRPD if it's specific to those two entities. Okay, so preparing for initial OSP review. This is critical information. You'll see the sponsor deadline. As Lauren noted before, research administrators and sponsor programs and myself and people in the departments will run reports out of the system to see. It helps us manage our workload, to see what's coming down the pike, what we've got coming up this week. And I run it several times, if not daily, when we start getting busy, because you can have PIs putting proposals in there at any time. Without the sponsor deadline, this record will not show up on our report. That is the one criteria that makes it show up on those reports that we pull out of the system so that we can help manage them. And so I often remind my PIs, this is a critical piece. Make sure that you get it right, because I myself get over easily 100 emails a day. And it's really easy to get lost in the shuffle and fall through the cracks. So we really rely on that report. That is a very critical piece of information. I tell my PAs, as soon as you get that basic info filled out, the very next thing, please put a deadline date, target, whatever you need, some date in the future so that we can get this on our radar and make sure that we're tracking it. And when you're in quality, if you have somebody that's working with a PI that needs additional access, if they have a collaborator, they want to look at it or help input information, there is an access menu option in KRPD that you can add access. It's usually the bottom half of the list. I'm not going to go down into the weeds and explain that. That would be handled in a KR training session, but just know that there is that option. And if you need guidance on how to do that, please feel free to reach out to your RA or the training team, and we'd be happy to help direct you to how to get that done in KR. You don't have to provide access for OSP RAs. Research administrators, by their role in the system, have access to your proposals. So there's no needed access there. This would be just be somebody at the department level. Like I said, maybe a co-PI, mentor, or something along those lines. And then one last little thing is when I mentioned the deadline date, we also need to know the type. So you have receipt, target, and postmark. Postmark is rarely used. That goes back to the days when we used to have to print an original in 14 copies. And you had to run out to Kinko's and get there before the 5 p.m. deadline and get it out the door to FedEx. A receipt deadline is just what that means. It means if the sponsor doesn't get that proposal on that date, it will not be reviewed. However, I have PIs sometimes that put in receipt because they really want to get it out by that date, but we really need to know, is it a receipt or if it's target? If it is not a receipt, meaning again, they will not review it if it's not received by that date and potentially time deadline as well, then you need to mark it as a target. And a note on the time deadline, within Koali, you can put a time deadline, but it does not have any option for entering time zones. So if you have a USDA NIFA deadline that says 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we need you to put 3 p.m. in because that's our time equivalent, 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And set feedback and routing for approvals. KRPD record with all final business related elements should be submitted to routing at least 3 business days prior to the sponsor deadline. And the steps are, the investigator, unit administrator, and OSP have reviewed and approved the final budget and business elements, as we noted in the previous slide. OSP has marked the KRPD budget as include for submission. And the initiator or unit aggregator investigator has clicked submit to routing, which is again now called submit to review. So that's one distinction. Shannon had already shared the link for guidance. There is in one of those tiles the proposal, review, and submission. So if we go to the next slide, this is one of the things that you can find in that guidance link under the proposal, review, and submission tile on the sponsor program's website. It's a checklist of OSP review responsibilities. And depending on how much time you give them, depends on the level of a review they can do. If you give it to them and it's due in 2 days and they've got a full queue ahead of you, you're not going to get the same quality review that you would if you adhered to the deadlines and got it to them 5 business days ahead. And again, you can give it to them earlier. There's no law against that. They would love you forever if you give them more time, because then they can do a quality review, point out anything, and offer some guidance or advice. Perhaps it's a solicitation that's new to your PI and has some really interesting components that you're not aware of, and they can offer you some guidance in that respect. The more time you give them, it allows them to do their job more effectively and provide a better review for your proposal and for your PI. Again, we're all on the same team. We want that product to be the best proposal out there so that they get funded. I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things really quick. Guidelines, RFP, that's something you should be reviewing if you're helping your PI. You need to review the guidelines thoroughly. PIs sometimes will kind of target in on, they may not read the whole thing. So that's why it's important for us to facilitate that and make sure that we're highlighting anything. So I try and read them ahead of time, highlight it in an electronic version, paper, whatever floats your boat, whatever way you like to do it. I still print some things, but they're going to look at that sort of information, and then they're going to look that you've got all the required documents, any certifications, representations that are institutional. Typically your RA will provide for you. I've had some recently where they wanted fact information from the institutional research website, like number of employees and that sort of information. And so that's something that as an RA, I help facilitate for my PIs because I know where to find it. And that's another helpful website at CSU, where it has our institutional profile and the fact book. Again, it's the institutional research website on CSU's webpage. You can find it there. One other thing I didn't get on the last slide you can leave here is OSP is not checking for spelling margins. That's pretty much up to your PI. And if you're, depending on your department level support, you may have department reviewers looking at that, but they're not looking at margins and font and all of that kind of detail. We trust that the PIs have read the solicitation. They know how to format this in the appropriate manner. And OSP's time is best used in reviewing the big things, like that we're not out of compliance on anything that we're requesting in the budget. We've not inadvertently promised cost share when it's not required, and that sort of thing. So the review provided by OSP adds value by ensuring that proposals submitted by CSU meet all sponsor requirements. Verifying proposal budgets align with sponsor requirements and CSU cost accounting standards. So we're not having PIs put in a budget that's promising cost share when it's not required on an NSF proposal, for example, when NSF doesn't allow cost share. Reviewing agreements upfront for acceptable terms and conditions. I get proposals sometimes where there's draft terms and conditions in the solicitation. And I've been doing this long enough that I know some of the unacceptable terms, and we'll kind of do a preliminary review, and then I'll kick it over to Kelly, my SRA and sponsored programs, and ask her to kind of give it a review. Because this is, again, the devil is in the details. You got to look at those solicitations. Sometimes in the solicitations or the RFPs, it says, by submitting this proposal, you're agreeing to all these terms and conditions in our sample agreement to be found at this link or included on page 15 or whatever. So you've got to read those solicitations carefully because they will sometimes have terms and conditions. I most often find that with some non-federal entities for the most part, but on occasion you'll get a solicitation that has contract language. There's another good clue for you. If you have FAR clauses noted, federal acquisition regulations, that's a hint to you that this is going to be a contract proposal. It's going to be much more stringent than a grant or cooperative agreement. And there's not the flexibility that there are on those other awards. And so that's something you definitely need to reach out to your OSP, RA, and team ASAP if you have an RFP that looks like it's going to be a contract, or if you have terms and conditions that are in the RFP or the language that says by submitting you're agreeing to all these terms and conditions. One thing, we used to get purchase orders from the state and I think maybe the city, and they would reference terms and conditions. It was fine print, and we would have to request those terms and conditions because there were terms and conditions that CSU as an institution of higher ed could not comply with. And so we would have to take exception to those at the proposal stage. So again, reading all those details, OSP provides a lot of value added, knowing all the things that are not acceptable, restriction on publication, for example, data ownership. I've had solicitations where it says, we want to own everything, which at the front, your PI may say, oh, that's fine, they can own this. But I remind them, if they own this, you can't do any further research using this data. So it's really important they provide a very valuable service to our research enterprise at CSU. So they provide a very, very valuable set of tools and knowledge to help you navigate these waters and get your proposal submitted and hopefully successfully awarded funding. And then the last bullet on this is confirming that subrecipient documentation is in place for streamlining the subaward process. Again, we need that mini proposal from our subaward entities prior to submission. We've got to review all of that and make sure there's no errors. So I'm checking their budgets as well as our budgets and make sure that they align with any sponsor restrictions or guidelines that they may have missed on their end. Okay, institutional authorizations. Proposals, awards, and other agreements, types for extramural funding must be reviewed and signed by an AOR. Authorized Organizational Representative is what the AOR stands for. To get signature approval on a completed proposal, the investigator must complete and route the KRPD records. So I don't know, on our team, if we get an award prior to the proposal going out, which happens, PIs are talking to their counterpart. I work with the Forest Service a lot, and we'll have their technical folks reaching out to my PIs because they know the work they do, and hey, we've got this money. Oh yeah, that sounds good. And before you know it, OSP emails me saying we have an award. And PI Smith is wondering, well, where's my award? Well, you haven't done your proposal. They must have that KRPD record and proposal fully routed and approved before sponsored programs can set up the award, and before the SRA, most times, will even take the opportunity to review. Because they've got so much in their queue, my SRA waits for that KRPD fully routed record before they start review. There may be components of your proposal that have, sometimes you'll have non-federal sponsors that have a signature page. And depending on the language, that signature page has to be signed either by an AOR that is authorized to commit funds for the university or enter into agreements for the university. That's not me. I'm an RA. I'm authorized to submit and sign for proposals, but I'm not authorized to sign agreements. So in those cases, I have to reach out ahead of time. Again, you got to plan ahead a little bit, reach out to my SRA and say, hey, Kelly, this is routing. We have this signature page and we need your signature. And you've got to understand that it's not just a rubber stamp. They need something to look at before they're going to sign, of course. So we need this well developed and pretty close to near final before they're going to sign off of that and provide us the documentation that we need to complete proposal submission. Faculty, investigators, department chairs, and deans are not authorized to sign proposals and awards. Anytime you have a PI that has an agreement, I always recommend that they reach out for signature, that they reach out to their sponsored programs team. Depending on the agreement, it could be something that OSP needs to sign or countersign along with a PI, or they may, if it's outside of their purview, they can direct them to legal. I think it's always a good idea. I've had things come back where the sponsors will send agreements to our PIs. And the PIs sit on it and they signed it and they sit on it. Well, where's my award? Well, they didn't send it to OSP. And number two, you're not authorized to sign. So again, there's very limited things that they are authorized to sign agreement-wise. So ask them to contact their OSP team, work through all those details, and they can advise them appropriately. For sponsored programs, the signature delegation authority has been delegated to the Vice President for Research, Associate and Assistant Vice Presidents for Research, Director and Assistant Director of Sponsored Programs, OSP Senior Research Administrators, SRAs, and Research Administrators, RAs. There are a few unit research administrators that have been granted AOR abilities for NSF submissions only. And so we've got ready, set, and go. Proposal submission. So 1 business day prior to your deadline, the KRPD record should be at OSP's level of approval. All attachments must be final and ready for submission to the sponsor. For sponsors requiring submission by authorized official, proposals should be available in the final format and the applicable portal and system. So for example, research.gov. I tell my PIs, don't forget, you've got to give me view, edit, and submit access in that system. Otherwise, I can't even see their application in research.gov, and I definitely can't submit it. I've had PIs, and different RAs may guide you differently. I kind of recommend to my PIs, when you go in and give that access, just give me all of it. I'm never going to submit until I know you're ready. We'll do this in coordination. That way you don't have to go back and try and figure out how to add one more piece. So I find that easier. And there's other grants.gov applications, which I complete all of the grants.gov applications. We don't do that many, and so I kind of took that on. There are other units across campus where the PI will start it perhaps, or their department person will start it, and then it has to be allowed. You have to give access to OSP for submission. And so that's something to be aware of. And we want those in final format 1 business day prior, like I said, and you can always do it earlier. And then we will submit. I usually, if it's an email submission, I submit all of the email submissions. Again, depending on your team and your RA, that may vary. But if it's a portal that requires an AOR submission, I will let my PI know if there's any kind of placeholder documents in KRPD, which is something that I kind of recommend my PIs when they're putting in their scope of work in the file name itself, not in the description, because in the description in KRPD, you cannot change that once it's in routing. But in the file name itself, call it either draft scope of work or narrative placeholder. So it's really a good visual cue before I submit to say, hey, I've got one more document that's not in final form, and I'll reach out to that PI and say, I need this. Or if it is in final form, I'll just change the file name. We're good to go, and I can get it submitted and uploaded into the system. And be sure to check with your SRA, RA to determine who is authorized to submit in those unusual circumstances. There are PI portals out there where they don't have an administrative role, and I call those PI submission portals, where then I go through the whole review process, and then I will send them an email and say, okay, it all looks good. All the approvals are done. All the T's are crossed, I's dotted. You are now authorized to submit this proposal. And I usually also request, if possible, if they have an option to download the fully submitted copy, to please download that and send a copy to us so we can provide it to OSP so they have a full final copy for their records, because they are the Office of Record for sponsored projects submissions. That's not always possible. Sometimes it's really clunky and they cut and paste, so we do the best we can, and I just upload the attachments that were submitted in KRPD and call it good. So as I mentioned, there's sponsored portals. Here are some more common ones. We have NASA, which is Inspires, NIH, which would either be grants.gov or Assist, and you have National Science Foundation, which is research.gov. Now, with that said, you can submit NSF through grants.gov, but our recommendation is if your sponsor has their own portal, Inspires for NASA, Assist for NIH, or research.gov, we recommend that you submit through those portals. For example, if you do an NSF submission through grants.gov, there's an extra step you have to go through. And so it's a little bit more clunky, it's more streamlined, and within these individual portals, they have their own business rules and validations built into their system that is not in grants.gov. Because remember, grants.gov was created decades ago with the idea of kind of a one-stop shop for all federal sponsors to go into. And now we've seen that it didn't work out quite as intended, because it's not one standard set of forms. There's all different kinds of forms that you use in grants.gov, and you don't have all the validations of all the individual sponsors. And so that's why some of them, outside of these three, they've had their own portals for a while now, but we're seeing Grant Solutions. We're seeing Easy Fed Grants from USDA for this reason, because they can embed their own business rules and validations into their own system to make things more streamlined on both sides. That is not available in grants.gov. Proposals submitted to non-federal sponsors may be submitted through the sponsors portal or through an email or the postal service, which still occasionally happens. It's rare, but there are those cases where we have to do a hard copy. The SF424 forms used by multiple federal agencies, that stands for Standard Form F24, and there's the 424A, which is the budget piece that goes along with the 424, and then a 424B, which is a certification. Those are very standard. It's basically salary, fringe, supplies, kind of your high-level budget categories that translate across federal agencies. You will occasionally see federal agencies using it differently than the form was intended. There is a second page. When you print those, you can find them on grants.gov website. I have them saved. I'm sure some of the RAs can point you to other websites if you'd like to find 424s, but it's a standard form that most federal agencies use. Proposal access and roles. So we've got Assist, grants.gov, research.gov, Inspires. The university is already registered in these systems. The university is already taking care of that. So depending on the system, access and roles is handled differently by every system. So again, the institutional registration with sponsored portals by CSU's e-business point of contact in OSP, that's Chris Carson. Andy Reynolds is also on her team. She's the ERA administrator in sponsored programs. And so you can reach out to her if they need access to that. One of the systems I mentioned earlier, Grant Solutions, PIs do need access to that if they're having awards from Department of Interior agencies, because they have to do their progress reports in that system. So they can reach out to Chris, and she will provide the necessary steps and guidance for how to get a role set up in that system. Account creations and affiliations vary by portal. For example, if you have a PI that's new to CSU, but used to work at another institution of higher ed and had previously submitted to NSF, they need to change their affiliation to CSU in that system. And so again, it varies by portal. So if your PIs are not sure, reach out to Chris Kirsten, Andy Reynolds, or your RA, and they can often provide guidance on the steps needed to get registered in that system and give you the information that you need. And then Dwayne has provided a link in the chat for access, an email link actually to the ERA team. So thank you, Dwayne, for that. That's good information. And once individual accounts are created and affiliated, the eBiz POC may need to assign specific roles in that portal.
Take a second to review these proposal review steps. Try to order them into what you think would be the ideal priority and order of submission. Now first we're going to start with Begin Proposal in KRPD, Quality Research Proposal Development. That's our first step. Next we go to item C, Notify OSP that a draft budget is ready for review in Quality. Next is going to be step A, Submit complete KRPD record for review. Remember to hit that button and notify your OSP team it's ready. Next is item E, we obtain approval to submit from OSP research administrators. Now this leads to we can submit our proposal to the sponsor, whether that is done by the OSP research administrator or by the unit. It depends on the sponsor. How did you do?
Institutional certifications, these are government-wide proposal certifications included in sam.gov. So as an institution of higher ed and doing work with the federal government, there's a website where we go in and as an institution annually renew our certifications regarding lobbying, debarment suspension, other responsibilities, drug-free workplace, non-discrimination. Certifications and representations for proposals generally require an AOR signature, whether it's an RA or an SRA. So keep that in mind. And we're happy to help with that.
Post-submission requests prior to review. Post-submission materials are those submitted after submission of the application, but prior to sponsor's initial review. And the purpose is not intended to correct an oversight or an error discovered after we've submitted the application, but rather to provide the sponsor with additional information that may not have been available at the time of applying. You see on the slide here are some good examples of what could be considered a post-submission material, but you always want to make sure that you're consulting the sponsor guidance on the different types of materials that can be accepted and how to submit those materials to the sponsor. There also could be formatting requirements or institutional authorizations or even deadlines associated with a post-submission material. So make sure you're following the guidance and working with OSP, copy them on your submission, and allow additional time if AOR submission is a requirement. Post-submission requests prior to award. Some sponsors allow us time to submit specific details later after a proposal passes the initial review. It's often referred to as a just-in-time request. This request is sent to the PI via email, usually requesting additional information on what's needed before we're officially awarded. When the PI receives that email, they're usually looping departmental support and OSP team in to help coordinate that submission. And with NIH just in time, it does require a signing official to make the official submission. So you'll have to work with OSP on that. And for these post-submission materials, there is no internal tracking. So you really do need to just coordinate and communicate with your OSP team. And now compliance matters. If one of your proposals involves any of these listed offices, additional documentation may be required before we submit. Just to go over a few of these offices. LAR, the Lab Animal Resources, they oversee care and management of animals used in research and teaching. The IRB, or the Institutional Review Board, is responsible for ensuring the ethical and equitable treatment of all human subjects. And then the Office of Research Integrity, which we are all going to start getting familiar with, manages responsible conduct of research education, and they also handle the misconduct allegations. But conflict of interest is highlighted on our slide because COI disclosure, as mentioned before, is mandatory for all PIs, co-PIs, and key personnel. We require an annual COI disclosure be submitted before OSP will submit a proposal, and then that annual disclosure needs to be approved if you receive an award before OSP will create your 53 account. So we are always trying to keep track of the status of your COI disclosure to ensure that we're not being held up with that.
Okay, so we're near the end here and just kind of looking at our worksheet really quickly. And we do have some acronyms here and just making sure that, are there any questions about the acronyms that we have on the worksheet? So if anyone didn't catch something or they're just not sure exactly what it is, one of the ones that I'm not sure that we said was NOFO, which is a Notice of Funding Opportunity.
Yeah, I don't think we said funding opportunity announcement either for the FOA.
FOA, yeah, great.
I just want to say thank you to our training coordinators. They have done a fantastic job of continuing to offer training opportunities at CSU. Being here as long as I have been, we didn't used to have this. So they have a wealth of information on the OSP training site, a lot of on-demand learning, and these two ladies work really hard and diligently to do the heavy lifting for these things. So thank you both very much.
Thanks. And I also want to give a special thanks to our presenters for sharing their expertise today. On behalf of the OSP Training and Professional Development Committee, we thank you for your participation in today's session.